New York, New York, New York. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Largest city, very complicated city, a lot of different people. It is the entry point for immigrants. Give us you're tired, you're hungry, you're huddled masses, all of that. And there's so many different languages spoken, different cultures. Somehow it is a great, not a melting pot, as David Dinkins would call it, a gorgeous mosaic of people. And it, to me, is the example of what America could be if we could get it right with a good mayor. This woman wants to be mayor of New York City. She comes through an education background. We're going to talk about that. Let me welcome her to the show. Mayoral candidate, Dianne Morales. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Listen, I was reading up on your background. I covered education on the editorial page for 4 years at the New York Daily News, wrote a series of editorials that changed school governance in New York, which is why the education system is now in the hands of the mayor. I did that, won a Polk Award for those editorials. And it was to me watching and really studying everything from vocational education to all those specialized schools, to the vast amount of segregation. I did a whole piece on how segregated New York City is. You actually worked for Joel as chief, I think you were chief of staff for Joel Klein.
I wasn't
Your
chief
mayor,
of staff. Yeah, I was the head of, I was the chief operating officer of one of the departments of youth and school community development under Joel Klein.
All right, I apologize for getting that wrong. But as a person that both has a child that has been in the system and who has seen the system up close and who has a degree from Harvard in this area, you're mayor tomorrow, you win. Mm-hmm. What's the first thing you do? Because I think that New York's education is, what's the first thing you do as mayor?
Yeah. So I'll say I have two kids that graduated from the New York City public school system, and they both had IEPs. For folks who don't know, that's an individualized education plan, basically for kids who learn differently. I also was a special education teacher in the system at the school where I went to kindergarten. So, and that's in addition to having worked under Joel Klein. One of the things I talk about a lot with the system, the education system in particular, is the failings, the extent to which it fails our Black and brown kids. Our kids don't see themselves reflected there, and they don't feel loved, valued, or respected. And you can't learn effectively if you're in an environment where you don't feel loved, valued, and respected. So one of the things that I have committed to actually is the idea of, in my first 100 days, implementing an executive order to immediately begin to desegregate our schools. That means moving away from screens and all kinds of, the racist admission policies that really facilitate the segregation from, in our schools. It means redrawing our boundaries of our school districts so that we can also begin to allow an increased access. And also addressing some of the funding disparities. We've got, we just won a case last month for the fair student funding formula. But really, we need to take a look at other disparities in the funding system that relate to demographics or socioeconomic status. I can go on. I don't know how much you want me to go on.
I want you to keep, because here's the thing. I was saying before you came in, a lot of these races are popularity contests. I don't know what Bill de Blasio skill sets. Like, I know that he wasn't an expert in education, organization, crime fighting, but he had a son with an afro named Dante, and people were like, oh, that guy got a Black son, I'm voting for him. I feel like it's going to happen again. And so I want to ask questions because we got to vote for people who can actually get some stuff done, or who know what the stuff that needs to get done, where the problems are.
Right. I think you're right. I think we have to move from the rhetoric to the execution. Because I also think, you're right about de Blasio, but he had a good vision that I think a lot of us bought into and were excited about initially. He just didn't have the I don't know if it was the skills or the backbone to execute on it. And I think that, when I think about myself, I've been an executive for decades. I've been an executive that's been responsible for making disparate parts of an organization work together towards a shared goal and a shared vision. organizations that have been responsible for having a direct impact on the lives of New Yorkers, right? And really, when you think about the mayor, the role of the mayor is as a CEO. They're supposed to be the executive of the city. They're supposed to make sure that all of the city agencies are working in tandem towards the best interest of New Yorkers. And that means actually being able to, be clear about what you want to do and how you want to do it, and being able to get everybody rowing in the same direction and bought into that vision and executing on it and holding people accountable. Right. And so that's something that I bring to the table. Actually, I don't think there's anybody else in this race that has been an executive in that way. There's a lot of people that have commissioned policy papers or have written legislation or have served as pundits opining on different things. But there's not a lot of people that have actually been doing the work on the ground. And I think that is one way that distinguishes me from other people in this race.
Okay. All right. I think you do have a handle on how education needs to be reimagined. Homelessness before COVID. New York, because again, unless you're so I don't live in New York, but I was in New York, both the east and the west sides, because I teach at Hunter College and SiriusXM is on the west side, and I'd have to cross that Central Park at least 3 times a week, and every day on the west side. And I started to see, because I've been working in New York since the 80s, since the late 80s at the New York Daily News. I've been in the subways, I've been driving throughout the city, and the homelessness issue in the 80s was horrible. Then you had the broken windows with Giuliani, and then you had Bloomberg following up, and then de Blasio came in, and there's been like this rampant increase of homeless people on the streets, and I've physically witnessed it. You've worked in this area. Tell us again, in your first 100 days, what do we do with people who are, a lot of whom need mental health options, and that's why they're out there. What's the solution?
Yep. So there's a couple different things, right? I think the first thing we have to recognize is that it's critical for us to guarantee housing for everybody. That, my homeless neighbor who also has mental health challenges and their lack of security, housing security, and their lack of mental health stability is going to impact me. What you're talking about in terms of walking back and forth across Central Park, that's an impact, right? We have the way we do housing, the framework for how we do housing in New York City has for too long prioritized luxury developers and their pockets, right? And so that is why you have seen the increase in homelessness, because they're not really creating affordable housing for New Yorkers. They're creating housing for like the very top tier, from a socioeconomic perspective, the top 10%. And I'm being generous in even saying that. And we get a fraction of what they build, despite the fact that they're getting subsidized by taxpayer dollars. And so the way we do housing needs to fundamentally be transformed. So guaranteeing housing for all, creating a deputy mayor position that is actually going to be charged with the holistic management of housing, right? Right now, the way we have it is siloed. You've got somebody over here dealing with homelessness. You've got somebody over here dealing with the quote unquote affordable housing that we know is not really affordable. And there isn't a real coordination, right? So we need to bring that all under the same roof. And we need to make a commitment. The dollars that we're giving to luxury developers in tax subsidies and tax incentives, we're not going to do that. We're going to invest that directly in the communities to make sure that we're using the housing stock that we do have available, the vacant storefronts, the hotel rooms, the commercial spaces and office spaces. If we need to convert those into housing, we're going to convert those. We're going to take over buildings from, dilapidated buildings from landlords that have been neglectful. We're going to build community land trusts, expand cooperative housing, social housing. These are things we can do if we actually decided to allocate our resources in a different way. And that's one of the things that I'm committing to prioritizing.
Well, you're talking about resources, but in 2020, about $1.4 billion in taxes left the city as people were, and even in 2019, people were leaving New York. And during COVID, people were leaving New York, and that those folk who could leave, were the ones that had the money, a lot of the money. So how do you replace those dollars, those, those high,
Yeah.
those high rollers? How
Yeah.
do you
So
replace that money?
a couple things I'll say on that, Karen, is I'm not sure that I really buy that narrative about the loss of all of this income. I still think people want to be in New York. They might have gone to their second home, but I don't think they gave up their first home. And so I think that's a kind of a fear mongering myth that I think is important for us to debunk and take head on. The second thing is, we didn't have the revenue law. The projections, said one thing, and the reality ended up being a lot less than anticipated. We've gotten additional revenue from the state, and we've got the federal funding coming in as well. All of that notwithstanding, I still think there is a significant impact that we could make with just the dollars that we already have, right? And I would start there first, right? The question is, how do we prioritize the money that we do have, and where are we spending that, and where are we investing that? And for too long, the model has been that we prioritize investing and spending that on the 1%, on the wealthiest, right? Whether it be their businesses, whether it be their homes. And we have divested from our communities, from our low-income Black and brown immigrant communities, working class communities, who we know are also the people that kept the city running in the middle of the pandemic. And so it's time for us to level the playing field. And the way we need to do that is by prioritizing and creating a budget that reflects our values and our priorities, by actually investing the dollars that we have control over in communities, and also the additional dollars that we know are coming, prioritizing the building of new communities at the local level.
Dianne Morales is here. She wants to be mayor of New York. And you can follow her at Dianne, Dianne, for the number 4 NYC, Dianne for NYC. Who are you? I know you're from Bed-Stuy. I know you're from Bed-Stuy. I know you're a single mom. I know that you went to Harvard. I know that you studied, you got a master's in education. And I know that you are somebody that is fiercely passionate about people who are underserved. But why do you want to be mayor? Like I have this conversation with people all the time, or run for any office for that matter, because, a lot of the work that gets done doesn't get done through bureaucracy. It doesn't get done usually in these places. And it's usually just a lot of stress and fighting.
Yeah, that's a good question. And had you asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said, I don't want to be mayor. I don't want to run for public office. Because, people have been telling me for about 10 years that I should run for office before I decided to actually seriously entertain the idea. Who am I? I am all the things you said. And also I am someone who has spent my entire career working to elevate our communities, working to, support and increase access and resources and opportunities to low-income Black and brown working class folks, through education pathways, through career pathways. And I was actually pretty successful at that. I can very proudly say that I've been impactful in the lives of a lot of people. But the reality of it is, when you are dealing with a system that has, where there's structural and systemic issues that are built to keep people in their place, and that are built to perpetuate inequities and disparities, after a while, it gets really frustrating, right? And so while I have been on the ground, and I've always been a true believer that the way to create real change and have real impact is mano a mano, shoulder to shoulder, on the ground with the community, we also need allies who are fighting for us on the inside to help transform those systems, because otherwise it's like a leaky bucket. And so I think at this point in my life, I'm 53 years old. At this point in my life, I decided that there was a lot of value to the possibility of me bringing my personal lived experiences combined with my professional executive experiences to bear on that system, to try to push for the kinds of change that we need, so that we are not rebuilding and going back to normal, but actually working to create a new New York City that's transformed and that takes on head on those structural and systemic inequities and disparities. And that's what I am, I'm ready to put the full weight of my passion, my experience, and my skills behind at this point in my life.
We're talking again with Dianne Morales. New York, I think in the next couple of years, if not already, will become another city that has more, I call it the global majority will reign supreme in numbers, right? But has been governed and continue to be governed by people who aren't from the global majority, who don't understand those struggles and those pains, even if they do have a child with an afro. There's a lot of money in politics, which is how you get the commercials on television and how you get. I've shared the story before, but working with Keith Ellison, he said one of the most distasteful things about running for office is that you have to run for office and ask people for money, and it takes you away from doing the work because you have to constantly fundraise, especially in Congress, is every 2 years, so you're fundraising every year.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that when there are people with deeper pockets that have trust funds and PACs that were designed because they have bigger aspirations than just mayor of New York, and there's a lot of money pushed behind them? How do you compete?
Yeah, I mean, right now in particular, actually, that's a really salient point. There's only 2 candidates in this race who are not backed by super PACs. The reality of it is, for me, that no one thought that I would make it this far, that my candidacy was dismissed from day one. The media just ignored me altogether. And there was a lot of sort of chatter, I call it, from among the people that I call the chattering class, the people that follow politics at all times, about my viability, which to me is just code for not having money, not having access to white rich men, not having access to power brokers, and not having been part of kind of like the political dynasties. But we have defied expectations at every turn. This campaign actually not only qualified for the public matching funds programs, which actually is supposed to be a level setter, except for those PACs, by providing an 8-to-1 match of dollars raised from New Yorkers. So we reached that threshold. But what's really fascinating is we reached it at primarily $10 increments of donations. We reached it with 30% of our donors reporting being unemployed. We reached it with an average contribution of $50, and we reached it with more donations from teachers than anybody else in this race. So to me, what's really kind of fascinating is that there is this movement of people who have been impacted by all of these systems and structures that's coming together and coalescing because the message of my campaign is resonating with them. And they are really, really, this is bigger than me at this point in time. The people that have made it possible for me to get this far are really propelling this race forward in an unprecedented way. And while I'm the first Afro-Latina candidate for mayor, I think what's really historic about this campaign is this group of people that is coming together at this moment in time to say, no, we're not going back. We want something different.
And as you're talking, I know no one was checking for AOC either. But she went out there and knocked on them doors and upset somebody who had got really comfortable. So I like that they're not checking for you the way they should be.
No, they're not.
You mentioned you're Afro-Latina, which again, to me, everybody's Black. So everybody. But there's a race component in New York, especially as it relates to police. Stopping the legacy of stop and frisk. I go back to Eleanor Bumpers and Sean Bell and Amadou Diallo and Patrick Dorsman. I was sitting at the Daily News when these people lost their lives. And I remember, Eric Gardner, first week on these airwaves, that video came out, and then Terrence Stansberry. And, I can literally rattle off. And the police, diverse. It's a diverse police force. And then Rikers Island, and then Khalif Browder. How do you wrangle that system with that union, with those people, with this history as mayor?
Yeah. So, police don't keep communities safe. I mean, that's one of the things that I strongly believe in, and I think many others do as well. I've called for defunding of the police by a minimum of $3 billion. The reality of it is that
3 billion.
$3 billion with a B. Yeah. Their budget is closer. Really, it's closer to between 10 and 12 billion. We have the largest police force in the world. We've got the most heavily funded and from a personnel perspective. And if in fact there was a correlation between funding or personnel and safety, we'd be the safest city in the world too. because no one can come close to us. But the fact that we have a police department that is that large, and we still have the things going on that we have going on, I think is testament to the fact that what leads to safety is actually meeting people's basic human needs, providing things like housing, making sure they know where the next meal is coming from, making sure they have access to jobs that make it possible for them to provide for their families. And we've actually been divesting from those things for decades, while we've been increasing the investments in policing. And we know who gets disproportionately harmed by policing and criminalized for being Black, and criminalized for being poor, and criminalized for being mentally ill, criminalized for being homeless, right? So we actually have to start investing in those things, that the things that are going to directly counter those things and remedy those things if we want to build safe communities. Insofar as taking on the NYPD, I mean, I haven't been part of this system, so I don't know anybody any favors except for the community that has made it possible for me to get to where I am. And those are the people on the ground. So I can be unapologetic about taking on those boys. And that's actually, and I know that gets me in a lot of trouble, but that's actually exactly part of why I'm in this race.
Yes, but it's good trouble, Dianne Morales.
That's
it's
right.
Good trouble. And we need all to be in good trouble. Listen, I'm gonna pay attention to what you're doing. I like what you're saying. I believe you. I believe you can actually get some stuff done. I hope New Yorkers wake the F up and let's stop with these popularity contests. Y'all, there's some stuff that needs to get done in New York, and I think Dianne Morales is made to do it.